The table was set like in the glossy pages of a lifestyle magazine. Linen napkins, rosemary tucked into bundles of cutlery, glasses that caught the soft shimmer of garden lights. It was my husband's idea to organize a family dinner in the backyard. Just us, he had said. But us now included our grown-up son and his friend. The boy who used to sleep over on the couch, who now held his glass of wine with the careless ease of a man who'd seen too much for his age. He had always been polite, always had that quiet, ironic smirk, like he was never entirely in the moment. But that evening, something had shifted. I noticed it when I reached for the basket of bread and our fingers brushed. It was a simple accident, the kind that happens 100 times between strangers. But he didn't recoil. He lingered just long enough for my skin to register the warmth of his hand, the dry roughness of his fingertips. I looked at him. A glance, nothing more. And he looked back. There was no smile, no hidden meaning. Just a look, steady and unmoved, as if he were studying me with a calm kind of interest. Like you would a painting you've seen 100 times and suddenly notice something new. I wore a pale silk blouse that night. Not for him, or so I told myself. It was soft against my skin, flowing and loose, but when I leaned forward, I was aware of how it shifted. I had felt nothing in it earlier, but after that glance, I found myself adjusting it more than once, smoothing the fabric along my sides, checking if the top button was still secure. The evening stretched. The air was warm with the scent of grilled food and cut grass, and the laughter of our son merged with the low hum of summer insects. My husband poured wine, leaned close when speaking to me, the way he always had. Everything looked perfect. But something trembled under the surface. Subtle, like a distant vibration under calm earth. Later, after everyone had retreated to their rooms, I went to the kitchen for water. The house was silent, cloaked in shadows, except for the under-cabinet lights that spilled soft gold over the marble counters. I didn't hear footsteps, only felt it. The sudden presence, the shift in the air. I turned and he was there, leaning against the fridge as if he had been standing there for a while, watching. In his hand, a half-empty glass of water. His eyes locked with mine. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. He raised his glass slightly, like a silent toast, and drank. Then placed it on the counter, eyes never leaving me. My heart was doing something unfamiliar. Not racing, but pushing. Like it wanted out. Like it wanted to move toward him, against all sense. I broke the silence first. Couldn't sleep? Too quiet, he said. Too much wine. Too many thoughts. There was something in his voice, low and slow, like a string being plucked gently, vibrating somewhere inside me. I forced a smile, turned toward the fridge to pour water. I could feel his gaze on my back, and I became acutely aware of the line of my spine, the sway of my hips, the soft arch of my bare feet against the cold tile. It was absurd, shameful even, how alive I felt, just being watched. I didn't linger. I took my glass and walked out without another word. But I felt his presence follow me down the hallway, pressing behind like a shadow that didn't need light. In bed, my husband stirred beside me. I listened to his breathing, slow and even. He reached out in his sleep and touched my arm. It was a familiar gesture, one that once calmed me. But tonight, it felt dull. His fingers were warm, but there was no current. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the sheet brush against my skin. Every part of my body that had been seen tonight, my wrist, the hollow of my collarbone, the edge of my blouse, now felt exposed, as if the memory of his eyes had left heat behind. I pressed my thighs together, not from desire, but from the restlessness of something beginning to rise. Something I didn't want. Something I couldn't name yet. I thought of his face in the kitchen, half-lit, calm, watching. I thought of the way he didn't smile, that stillness, that audacity. He was just a boy. But no, not anymore. And I apparently was not as asleep inside my skin as I had believed. I turned to my side and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, but to hide from the realization blooming in the dark. The next few days passed with the quiet, hollow rhythm of routine. Coffee in the morning, the hum of my husband shaving in the bathroom, emails, errands, light meals, the slow scroll of time in a house that seemed unchanged. I moved through it all as if the air itself had thickened, like I was swimming under the surface of my own life, watching myself perform roles I no longer fit into. He was around. The friend. He came and went like before, laughing with my son in the living room, raiding our fridge, dropping his shoes at the door as if this house had always been half his. Maybe it had. I used to love that. The way our home was always full of life. But now that same energy felt charged. Not innocent, not light. And I hated that I felt the change. I hated how I caught myself watching for him in the corners of rooms. How I smoothed my blouse before going downstairs. How I heard his laugh in the hallway and felt it like a drop of something hot on my neck. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust in the usual sense. It was a rupture. A crack in the surface of who I thought I was, and through it came light. Raw, dangerous, real. That night, it was just the three of us home. My husband had gone to bed early with a headache, something mild but dramatic enough to grant him silence. My son had headphones on, gaming in his room. I found myself in the kitchen again, unplanned, in slippers, in a robe that clung too tightly in all the wrong places. I opened a bottle of wine not because I wanted to drink, but because I needed something to do with my hands. And then he was there, again, as if this was a pattern we'd always known. He stood in the doorway, leaned against the frame like he had every right to. And maybe he did. Couldn't sleep? I asked, my voice softer than I meant. Didn't try, he said, too loud in my head. I poured a second glass and handed it to him. He didn't touch my hand this time, but the distance between our fingers was too narrow, too electric. We stood side by side at the counter, the house a silent witness to the tension hanging between us. I like this version of you, he said quietly, not looking at me. Without the performance. I turned to him. What performance? He met my eyes. The one you put on when everyone's watching. You don't need it, not with me. I hated how my breath caught. I hated how true it felt. I took a slow sip of wine to hide it, but he had already seen. Of course he had. He reached out, not quickly, not dramatically, just reached, touched my wrist. Barely. A single finger brushing along my skin, enough to remind me that I was a body, not just a role. I looked down. The skin there tingled, reacted without permission. I should go, I said. He didn't answer. I mean it, I added, but the words had no anchor. I didn't move. He turned slightly toward me. The look in his eyes wasn't pleading. It wasn't even certain. It was open, dangerous in its openness. And then it happened. There was no music, no sweeping motion, no stumble, no cinematic clumsiness. It was deliberate. It was quiet. His lips touched mine like he'd already been there 1,000 times in his mind. Like my mouth was familiar, and he was only remembering the shape of it. I didn't pull away. Not right away. I told myself it was shock, but it wasn't. The kiss deepened for only a breath. No more. But in that breath, everything I had buried cracked open. I felt my spine soften, my shoulders lose their guard, my fingers curl slightly at my sides. My mouth parted with a sigh I didn't know I was holding. Then I stepped back. My heart was pounding. I could hear it, a thunder between my ears. My face was warm, my lips tingled. His eyes searched mine, not with apology, but with the unbearable honesty of someone who had nothing to hide. I need to go to bed, I said, more to the floor than to him. He nodded once. No words. I turned and walked away. Not fast, not slow. Every step felt loud on the wooden floor. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But in bed, I didn't sleep. My husband's body beside me was warm and familiar, his breathing slow and deep. I watched the ceiling again, counting the same shadows as the night before. But now my lips still held the shape of another's. The taste. The heat. I pressed my hand to my chest as if to hold something in. Something rising too fast. Too sharp. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was hunger. It was the terrifying realization that someone had seen me. Not as mother, not as wife, but as woman. And I had kissed him back. I hadn't planned to say yes to the trip. It was my husband's suggestion, offered casually over coffee, like a spoon stirred too many times in the same cup. You should go to the seminar. Take a break from everything. He meant it as kindness, as support, maybe even as love. But I heard something else in his voice. Not suspicion, not distance, just habit. And it terrified me more than any betrayal would have. I packed quickly. Too quickly. As if I were afraid I'd change my mind if I gave myself time to think. I chose lingerie I hadn't worn in years. Delicate, powder-colored, soft like a second skin. I folded it into my suitcase beneath a linen shirt and conservative blouse, as if hiding it from myself. I couldn't explain why I brought it. Not then, but I know now. The city met me with that sticky, saturated summer heat, the kind that makes your skin restless and your thoughts slow. The boutique hotel I booked was modest, tasteful, the kind of place meant for silence. Thick whitewashed walls, tall windows, wood that smelled of dust and lavender. My room was simple, warm, anonymous. I wandered the streets that afternoon with no purpose. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't check the map. I just walked, letting the rhythm of my heels pull me down cobblestone alleys under hanging cafe lights, past old balconies and windows full of wilting plants. Evening came slowly. The sky thickened into indigo. The air settled like a question waiting for an answer. I stepped into a quiet wine bar, the kind with jazz murmuring under its breath and shelves of dusty bottles behind the counter. And there he was. He stood at the bar, his sleeves rolled just enough to show the curve of his forearms, his hair slightly undone. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look like he'd just happened to be there. You found me, I said. Or you found me. I don't know who smiled first. Maybe neither of us did. I sat next to him. There was no kiss, no touch, no grand rush of anything. Just silence and that impossible tension. Like sitting too close to a fire you pretend you don't feel. Why are you here? I asked. He turned his glass slowly in his hand. Then, looking directly at me, he said, Because I wanted to see you. Because I can't stop thinking about you. It didn't sound like a line. It wasn't slick or rehearsed. It sounded like what it was. Honest. We talked. About the city. About nothing. About everything. But all of it felt like prelude. Every glance was heavier than the words between us. When we stood up to leave, my knees felt unsure. The wine? Number him. He walked me to my hotel. Neither of us asked if the other wanted to say goodbye. We didn't need to. In the elevator, we stood side by side, not touching, not speaking. But the air between us was unbearable. I could feel the warmth of his body, the faint scent of his skin, the quiet restraint in how still he was. My heart was louder than the music piping through the hallway speakers. At my door, I turned to him. He looked at me, not hungrily, not impatiently, just present. Do you want to come in? I heard myself ask, not recognizing my own voice. He didn't move, didn't smile, just studied my face. Only if you want me to. The pause between us stretched. I held the door open. My fingers were trembling. My mouth tasted of wine and something metallic. Nerves, maybe. Or longing. But I stepped back, closed the door, and stood behind it, eyes shut, heart racing. I pressed my palms flat against the cool wood, like I needed to hold myself upright. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway, and still I stood there, breathless. Later that night, I lay in bed with the lights off, sheets tangled around my legs, the air too warm against my bare skin. I stared at the ceiling, but all I could see was his face, the way he'd looked at me. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's mother, but as a woman who still had choices, a body that still felt. I slid a hand along my side, not with intent, not to seek pleasure, just to feel, to remember, to ground myself. My skin felt different, warmer, like I had crossed into a version of myself I hadn't touched in years, one that was breathing now, quietly under the surface. In the morning, I woke before sunrise. I stood in the mirror for a long time, watching the steam fade from the glass. My reflection was sharper than I remembered. There was something in my eyes, a darkness, a question, a challenge. I didn't let him in, but I hadn't closed the door. Not really. Coming home felt like slipping into an old coat. Warm, familiar, slightly frayed at the edges. My husband met me at the door with his usual quiet smile, the same one that had comforted me through illness, through stress, through every version of myself over the years. He hugged me gently, kissed my cheek, and took my bag as though everything in our world remained exactly as it had been. And maybe it had. At least for him. For me, nothing felt the same. The air in our house had changed. Or maybe I had. Every object seemed to hold a memory now, a subtle weight. The glass I used to drink water the night I kissed him. The hallway where we passed each other without words. The living room where laughter always came too easily. These things hadn't moved, but they pressed against me differently. Like they knew. I moved more carefully around the house in the days that followed. My husband was attentive. He asked about the seminar, made jokes about how he survived the weekend alone, offered to take me to dinner, just the two of us. I smiled. I nodded. I responded as I always had. But part of me watched myself doing it. Like I was impersonating someone who used to live in this skin. It wasn't that he was inattentive. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't neglectful. That would have been too easy. No, the truth was worse. He was good. Predictable. Safe. Every morning, he brought me coffee just the way I liked it. Every evening, he turned down the bed and made sure I had my book light. He loved me with the quiet, practiced devotion of a man who had never questioned the strength of the bridge we stood on. And maybe that's what scared me. Because I had started to question everything. And then there was the mirror. It started with little things. How I adjusted the neckline of my blouse. How I chose softer fabrics that clung more. How I checked my reflection twice instead of once. I started wearing perfume again. The one I hadn't touched in months. Subtle, but intimate. Something floral. Something meant for skin close enough to breathe it in. I told myself it was for me. But I knew it wasn't only that. The first time I saw him again was a week after I came back. My son had invited him over for dinner. Casual, unassuming. I didn't know he was coming until I heard his voice in the hallway. Low, familiar, too calm. I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of pasta when he walked in. Alone. I didn't turn. I kept my hand on the spoon, focused on the rhythm of stirring. "You're back," he said simply. "I am," I replied. A pause. Long enough to hold 1,000 unspoken things. "You look different." I turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes. "Do I?" He nodded. "Not bad different. Just more like yourself." I don't know why, but my throat tightened. I laughed. Soft, breathless. "Funny, I don't know who that is anymore." Another pause. This time heavier. He stepped closer. Close enough for me to feel it. That low hum of something unspoken between us. Not lust. Not exactly. It was sharper than that. More dangerous. Then the sound of my son's voice shattered the moment, and we both stepped back. the way people do when a door swings open too fast. That evening, as we all sat around the table, I wore a dress I hadn't put on in years. It was simple, knee-length, dark, but cut in a way that curved gently along my waist. I hadn't worn it for him. At least that's what I told myself. But I watched the way his eyes followed the line of my collarbone when I reached for the salt. He didn't stare, just observed. Noticing was worse than staring. After dinner, my husband pulled out an old photo album. He'd been organizing it for weeks, a new hobby. We laughed at old pictures, school events, birthdays, summer vacations. Then he turned a page, and there it was. A picture from last Christmas, all of us standing in front of the fireplace. My son in the middle, him to the left, me to the right, and our hands, not touching, but close. So close you could see the tension in the space between, as though they had wanted to touch but hadn't. The image hit me like a slap. My husband stared at it a little longer than the others, just a second too long. He didn't say anything. That night, as we got ready for bed, he looked at me differently. There was something in his eyes, not suspicion, but attention. He touched my arm as I turned off the light. "You've been quiet since you got back," he said softly. "I guess I'm just tired," I answered, climbing into bed. He climbed in beside me and shifted closer. His hand found my hip under the blanket, a gesture I had known for years. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. But I felt the coldness all the same. We kissed, slowly, carefully. His lips were warm, his touch gentle. There was nothing wrong with it. And maybe that was the problem, because all I could feel was the absence of urgency, the absence of hunger, the absence of being truly seen. Afterward, I lay still beside him, watching the red numbers on the digital clock change slowly. His breathing became steady again. Sleep claimed him without resistance, but I was wide awake. And in the silence, I touched my own wrist where the other he, had once brushed it. The same skin, the same memory. I thought of how I had closed the door in that hotel. Thought it meant I still had control. But now, lying next to my husband, the weight of that restraint felt less like victory and more like a lie. It was supposed to be just a party. Our son's idea? A casual backyard get-together with friends from college, neighbors, a few familiar faces from his childhood. My husband loved the idea, of course. He fussed over the grill all morning, made jokes about feeling like a cool dad, rearranged the patio furniture twice, and trimmed the hedges even though no one would notice. I watched him move with that quiet, efficient energy that used to calm me, and now only left me feeling still. Like everything around me was in motion while I remained untouched by it. I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. A summer dress, pale beige, almost the color of sand, with thin straps and a hem that floated just above my knees. It clung to my hips in a way I usually would have considered too revealing. But that day, I didn't care. I told myself it was hot out. I told myself I wanted to feel comfortable, but I chose that dress knowing it made me look like a woman someone might want. Not a mother, not a wife, just a woman. I didn't see him arrive, but I knew the moment he did. It was something in the shift of energy across the lawn. My son laughed louder. Music changed. I turned and saw him near the cooler, opening a beer, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, shirt sleeves rolled, casual, golden. He looked like youth itself, but heavier, like he carried more than he let show. Our eyes met only once, but that one glance landed on my skin like sunlight through glass. Bright, too focused, too hot. I turned away, talked to neighbors, carried bowls of chips and watermelon, but I was moving through water. I felt every step, every swish of my dress against my thighs. My body was more than mine that day. It was seen. At one point, I stepped around the side of the house to check on the citronella candles. The sun was lower then, and the light had taken on that strange golden tone it only gets in late summer, like the day was holding its breath. I was alone, or so I thought, until I heard footsteps behind me. "You look different again," he said. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I could feel him standing just a little too close. The air between us pulsed. "You keep saying that," I replied quietly. He stepped around me slowly, standing where I could see him, where the sunlight hit his face and made his expression unreadable. "Because it's true." I looked at him then, and there was something in his eyes. Not boldness, not challenge. Something quieter. Hunger, yes, but also confusion. Maybe even need. The party hummed faintly in the distance. Laughter, music, clinking glasses. But around us, it was still. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "You don't want me here?" His voice was soft, without accusation. Just asking. I looked at the ground, then back at him. "I don't know what I want." That was a lie, and we both knew it. He took a step closer. Close enough that I could smell his skin again. Clean, warm, familiar now in a way it never should have been. I didn't move. And then he kissed me. It wasn't like the first time. Quiet. Questioning. This was different. Bolder. Hungrier. It caught my breath. It dissolved the space between us like it had never existed. His hand moved to the back of my neck, not forcefully, but with a kind of silent urgency, as if he'd been holding himself back for too long. I kissed him back. The edge of the house pressed into my back. The evening air moved around us, heavy with jasmine and charcoal smoke. I was aware of everything. The scratch of stucco on my shoulder blade, the way my fingers curled into his shirt, the sound of my own breathing. And then it was over. He stepped back. I blinked. For a moment, we said nothing. The silence was deafening. I turned and walked away. Back into the party. Back into the light. I didn't look for my husband, though I knew he was somewhere nearby. Laughing, refilling glasses. I passed him in the kitchen as I grabbed a pitcher of lemonade. He touched the small of my back in that familiar way, the one that used to make me feel safe. But now, it made my skin tense. Not because it was wrong, because it was empty. Later, after the guests had gone and the house had quieted, I sat alone on the back steps. The night was warm. The grass smelled like beer and earth. Crickets chirped in steady rhythm. I watched the sky, trying to make sense of what I had just done. But there was no sense to be made, only sensation. I wasn't sorry. I felt guilt, yes. Shame, of course. But beneath it, deeper, quieter, I felt something else. Something more dangerous. Satisfaction. It terrified me. My phone buzzed. A message. "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe him. I did. But because I knew the truth behind those words. He wasn't sorry he kissed me. He was sorry for what it meant. For what it changed. And so was I. I deleted the message. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I knew I wouldn't. Not tonight. Not ever. Inside, my husband was watching TV. He called my name once, but not urgently. Not with need, just checking if I was there. I was, and I wasn't. I told myself I needed to return something. A jacket he had left over the back of one of our kitchen chairs during the party, probably without realizing. It was late when I texted him. Too late for it to be casual, too late for it to be innocent. But I did it anyway. "You forgot your jacket." He replied almost instantly. "Come by if you want. I'll be here." No emojis, no questions, just space. Space I could step into or ignore. I don't know what I expected to feel as I pulled out of the driveway, jacket folded on the seat beside me. My husband was out for the evening, catching up with an old colleague, some spontaneous dinner invite. I told him I might go for a walk. I didn't say where. I didn't say with whom. He kissed me on the forehead like he always did and didn't ask anything more. I don't think I had ever driven through our town so slowly. Streetlights stretched across the hood of the car like soft ribbons of judgment. I watched houses blur past, windows glowing with the quiet stories of people who weren't chasing anything. His building was tucked behind a bookstore and an old dry cleaner. The kind of place that smelled like floor polish and dust, but still managed to feel like someone's life was happening behind its walls. He opened the door before I knocked. "Hey," he said. I stood there holding the jacket awkwardly in both hands like a peace offering. "I brought this." He took it from me, nodded once, then stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was cleaner than I remembered. Books stacked neatly, dishes put away. A faint scent of eucalyptus or soap lingered in the air, and something else beneath it. Something distinctly his. He hadn't put on music. No distractions. I sat on the edge of his couch, hands resting in my lap. He stood in the kitchen, pouring water into 2 glasses. I watched the way his back moved as he reached overhead, the way he moved so comfortably in his own space. It was both infuriating and magnetic. How calm he seemed. He handed me the glass without a word and sat across from me. We drank quietly. "You didn't have to come," he said finally. "I know." "But you did." "Yes." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sharp, like the silence between 2 sentences that don't belong to the same story but somehow ended up next to each other. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he said. I stared into my glass. My fingers were damp from condensation. I didn't answer, because the words inside me weren't simple enough to speak. When I finally looked up, he was watching me. Not impatiently, not expectantly, just watching. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "That makes 2 of us." Another long pause. Then he added, softer this time. "But I know what I want." I swallowed. "And what is that?" "To not pretend," he said. The words landed with a kind of cruel clarity. I felt something between my ribs loosen and pull tight all at once. I stood up abruptly and walked to the window. The street outside was empty. A street lamp flickered against a parked car. When I turned around, he was closer. "I shouldn't have come," I whispered. "But you did." His hand was at his side, not reaching for me. But I could feel the potential of it, the charged possibility hanging in the few feet between us. That proximity had become unbearable. It hummed louder than my thoughts. "I don't want to be someone I don't recognize," I said. "I don't want to destroy what I have." He nodded. "Then don't destroy it. Just stop pretending it's enough." I let the words hit me fully, like wind at the edge of a cliff, terrifying and clarifying. My body responded before my mind could. I stepped forward. I reached out and touched his face. Not to pull him closer, just to feel it. Real, solid, warm. He closed his eyes. I didn't kiss him. I didn't let him kiss me. We stood like that for what felt like a lifetime. My fingers on his cheek, his hands at his sides, breathing the same shallow air. Then I pulled away. "I have to go." He didn't stop me. He didn't follow. He only nodded, once. Like a soldier accepting orders he doesn't believe in, the drive home was longer than it should have been. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. The streetlights were sharper this time, less forgiving. At home, I undressed slowly. Not with ceremony, with weight. Every layer felt like another decision I hadn't made properly. I stood in front of the mirror in just my underwear. Pale, silk, simple. My skin still held the warmth of his apartment, the echo of something almost happened. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. What I felt was something worse. Clarity. That I wanted to go back. That I would. Not out of weakness. Out of something much more dangerous. Need. The days blurred. There was a rhythm to everything again. Emails, laundry, quiet dinners. My husband was in one of his phases, the kind where he becomes particularly attentive for no specific reason. He brought flowers, cooked on weekends, asked me how I slept each morning, and kissed my forehead with more pressure than usual. From the outside, it would seem we were in a soft resurgence, like something in us had realigned. But inside me, something else had crystallized, something sharper, truer, and much less manageable. We hadn't spoken since I left his apartment. No texts, no chance meetings. But his presence clung to me in subtle ways. A scent on a jacket, a song I heard while folding laundry, the way my hand hovered too long on the kitchen counter where he'd once leaned. I had managed to stay away until one night, as we were clearing dishes, my son sat down at the table, laughing about something he'd read on his phone. Then, casually, like it meant nothing at all, he said, "He's got a crush." Can you believe that? On some older woman, apparently. Keeps bringing her up like she's a movie character. He won't say who it is, though. Thinks it's this big mystery. He laughed again, shoving a handful of chips in his mouth, oblivious to the way my breath stopped. I stood frozen with a plate in my hand, trying to keep my face still. My husband, already distracted by something on his screen, didn't notice. My son kept talking, the way young men do when they think they're in on a joke no one else understands. I excused myself and went upstairs. Not rushed, not dramatic, just calm enough to not raise suspicion. In the bathroom, I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at myself in the mirror. The person staring back looked no different. But my chest was tight. My stomach was coiled. I hadn't expected to be spoken about. I hadn't expected to be real to anyone outside of that invisible space we occupied. And hearing it secondhand, filtered through my son, so casual, so light, made it unbearable. That night, I didn't wait for sleep to come. I sent the message. "We can't do this anymore." I didn't hesitate. I didn't even think about it. And then, a minute later, I followed with another, "But I don't want to stop." His reply came less than 10 seconds later. "Then don't." We met the next evening. I didn't plan an excuse. I didn't lie. I just said I needed time alone and left the house with my heart thudding like it wanted to break free from my chest. I didn't wear anything new. Jeans, a black top, nothing suggestive. But underneath, I chose carefully. Dark red lace I'd bought years ago and never worn. Not for effect. For courage. He opened the door the same way he had before. Quiet, steady, like he had been expecting me all along. There were no drinks, no music, no conversation. He stepped aside and I walked in. And then we stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, still as statues. "I didn't think you'd come," he said softly. "I did," I answered. There was nothing more to say. He reached for me, and this time I didn't step back. I let him. I let everything I'd been holding break open. The way he touched me wasn't frantic. It wasn't calculated. It was full. Like he had memorized the shape of my hesitation and wanted to rewrite it with something else. Need, certainty, risk. My hands moved without thought, along his shoulders, his neck, as if my body had always known its way to this moment and had only been waiting for me to stop resisting. There was no fear, no guilt, only the sound of our breathing, the scratch of fabric, the pulse in my throat. We didn't speak until much later, when we were lying on the couch, legs tangled, our skin still warm from the afterglow of something neither of us had dared name. "I don't know how to go back," I said quietly, more to the ceiling than to him. "Do you want to?" I thought about it. About the man who loved me safely. About the son who had no idea. About the house that felt like a memory. And I said the only thing that felt true. "I don't know, but I know I don't want this to stop." He didn't promise anything. He didn't try to explain. He just took my hand and kissed the inside of my wrist. A gesture so small and reverent it made my throat ache. When I finally left, it was after midnight. The streets were empty. The air smelled of wet asphalt and night-blooming flowers. I sat in the car for a long time before starting the engine, watching the condensation gather on the windshield. At home, the house was dark, everyone asleep. I moved quietly, slipping out of my clothes and into the shower, letting the water run hotter than usual, hoping it would erase some part of the evening. Not the touch, not the sensation, but the consequences waiting behind them. But nothing washed away. Not the feel of his mouth on mine, not the memory of his hands, not the sound of my own voice saying, I don't want this to stop. And worst of all, not the part of me that meant every word. When my husband suggested the trip, it caught me off guard. We were sitting in the living room one Sunday morning, half-dressed in the casual laziness of a weekend. Coffee mugs warm in our hands, the newspaper folded in his lap. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel comfortable. But lately, even silence between us felt like something left unsaid. You and I should get away, he said, not looking up. Just a couple of days. The cabin, maybe? Or the lodge in the hills? Somewhere without phone signal. He said it lightly, like a passing thought. But I heard the weight behind it. There was something in his voice. Not desperation, not exactly. More like hope. Or fear. And I hated that I couldn't tell which. I agreed. I smiled the way wives do when trying to meet halfway. The way women do when their insides are too complicated to explain in a single look. The lodge was tucked away near a lake, surrounded by mountains just beginning to shift into the first hues of autumn. We'd been there before, years ago. The walls were made of old wood and memory, fireplaces in every room, heavy quilts on the beds, the kind of place that offered silence like a gift. He was gentle with me that weekend. He brought my favorite wine, remembered the old hiking trail I liked, spoke softly, without pressure, as though trying to remind me of something we used to be. I listened. I tried. I let him hold my hand as we walked, let him make small jokes and pull me close for photographs I didn't want to be in. I even laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I wanted to feel something real again. And part of me did. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The first night we sat by the fireplace, sharing a blanket, glasses of wine resting on the low wooden table between us. Outside, the wind knocked gently at the windows, the trees swaying like old ghosts. He looked at me for a long time, his fingers tracing slow circles on my knee. I miss you, he said. Just like that. Nothing dressed up, nothing dramatic. I looked at him, at his eyes, tired, kind, honest, and I hated how much I wanted to answer with a lie. Instead, I said, I know. He leaned in and kissed me. Tender, careful. His mouth knew mine well, remembered every pattern, every breath. And I let it happen. I kissed him back. Let him guide me to the bedroom where the sheets were thick and cold. He touched me the way a man touches someone he believes he knows entirely, a map he's read 1,000 times. But I felt like a stranger in my own body. I responded where I was expected to, gasped where I always had. I played the role perfectly, but my mind was far away. I lay beneath him thinking of someone else's hands, someone else's voice. Not out of malice, not out of cruelty, but because that's where the current was pulling me now. Afterward, I rolled onto my side and stared out the window at the dark outline of trees. My husband touched my back, his fingers moving lightly across my shoulder blade. You're quiet, he said. I'm just tired. He kissed the back of my neck, murmured something about how beautiful I looked in the firelight. I didn't respond. I wanted to sleep, but not here. Not like this. The next morning, we ate breakfast in a little cafe near the lake. He seemed lighter, like the night before had convinced him something had been repaired. I smiled when he looked at me. I even reached across the table and touched his hand. Because I wanted to believe, just for a moment, that something could still be mended. But when we returned to the lodge and I stepped into the bathroom alone, my phone buzzed on the counter. I miss you even when you haven't left. No name, no punctuation, just that sentence. I stared at it, the words burning a hole through me, and I felt it. The ache, the pull, the unmistakable gravity of someone who had become more real in his absence than anything around me in the present. That night, I stood outside on the balcony after my husband fell asleep. The mountains were quiet. The stars looked cold and unreachable. I wrapped myself in a shawl and scrolled through old messages, rereading ones I'd deleted but never forgotten. I wanted to feel clean, to feel honest, to step back from the edge. But instead, I thought of the way his hand had found mine that night. I almost didn't go to him. The way he waited for me to make the decision. The way he didn't try to explain it. He just was real, present, wanting. Back inside, the air in our room was too warm, the bed too soft. My husband murmured something in his sleep and rolled toward me. I stared at the ceiling and remembered how the other's voice sounded when he whispered my name, not out of possession, but out of desire. As if saying it was enough to unravel something in him. I wanted that again. And I knew I would have it. The morning of my husband's birthday arrived with the quiet, rehearsed joy that always made me feel like I was acting in someone else's memory. I woke early before the sun had fully pulled itself over the line of the trees and sat at the edge of our bed watching his chest rise and fall. There was a time I would have reached out and touched his skin just to feel the comfort of it. Now, I only watched. That distance was no longer new. It had become part of the rhythm. He stirred, smiled sleepily, pulled me close. "Another year older," he murmured, burying his face in my shoulder. I kissed his forehead. It felt familiar, like opening a drawer you no longer use. The house began to fill by early afternoon. Our son had invited too many people, classmates, neighbors, even his former piano teacher, who brought a bottle of cheap champagne and a half-hearted smile. I kept my hands busy, slicing fruit, reheating appetizers, setting out napkins I'd folded into triangles. My movements were automatic, efficient. Then I saw him. He arrived a little late, alone. He stepped in carrying a modest gift, his hair slightly damp as if he'd showered in a rush. His eyes searched the room and landed on me for the briefest moment before glancing away. That moment was enough. My body reacted instantly, breath tightening, skin alert. No one noticed. Everyone was too busy shaking hands, clinking glasses. I wore a black dress that day, simple, fitted, with a low open back that flirted with the air every time I turned. Underneath it, I wore nothing accidental. Lace, thin, dark wine-colored. A secret worn not for seduction, but for a reminder. A symbol. That I had made choices. That I wasn't stumbling. That something inside me had changed for good. We didn't speak. Not for a long while. We moved through the house like parallel currents, avoiding each other in full view. He laughed at a joke someone made. I poured wine. He helped our son set up a speaker. I cut slices of cake. But I could feel him. Always. Every movement, every presence, every moment where our gazes almost collided. Then, by chance or design, we ended up in the same hallway. The noise from the party filtered down from the living room, a distant hum. I was carrying a tray of empty glasses. He was leaning against the wall near the coat rack, scrolling through his phone like he didn't know I was approaching. I slowed, stopped. He looked up. Neither of us spoke. The silence was louder than anything upstairs. My heart beat so violently I was afraid it might echo. His eyes moved slowly from my face down to my shoulder, then the curve of my arm, then back up again. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to. "You look—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I nodded once, not trusting my voice. I could feel the way the air changed between us, the invisible pull that had become a living thing. I wanted to touch him. Desperately. Not out of lust, not even out of love, but out of recognition. Out of the terrifying truth that he saw me. that I saw myself in the way he looked at me. He took a step forward. Barely. A movement so slight it would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But to me, it felt seismic. Then footsteps approached. I turned quickly, disappearing into the kitchen before the moment could explode. My hands shook as I set down the tray, nearly knocking over a stack of plates. I breathed in deeply, let the sound of party chatter flood back in to drown the pounding in my ears. When it was time for toasts, my husband stood at the head of the room with a wine glass raised, smiling like he always did, full of charm, ease, certainty. "I just want to say," he began, "that none of this means anything without this woman beside me." He looked at me. The guests turned. I smiled perfectly. "She's been my rock, my partner, the person who still makes me want to come home every night." Applause. Warm laughter. He reached for my hand, pulled me close. I kissed him on the cheek. I didn't tremble. I didn't flinch. I played my part to perfection. But across the room, I caught his gaze. He stood still, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. But his eyes told me everything. They weren't pleading. They weren't possessive. They just asked one quiet question. What now? And the answer? I didn't have one. Later, as the guests filed out and the candles melted down to soft puddles, I slipped away to the back patio. The night was cooler than expected. I wrapped my arms around myself and leaned against the railing, listening to the faint sound of crickets, the rustle of wind in the trees. He appeared beside me minutes later. No announcement, no sound. We didn't look at each other. "You'll leave soon?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. We stood in silence again. Then finally I turned to him, my voice quiet, steady, but laced with the unbearable weight of everything unspoken. "I don't know how to do this anymore." He looked at me, not with pity, not with anger, just with truth. "Then don't do it the way you've always done it." I wanted to cry, not from sadness, but from the ache of being known too well. He didn't try to touch me. He didn't say anything else. He left through the side gate. I heard it click behind him, a soft, final sound that didn't feel final at all. When I went back inside, my husband was cleaning up the plates, humming to himself. He looked up, smiled, handed me a dish towel. As I took it, I wondered how many more nights I could live between two lives, one where everything looked right, and another where nothing made sense except the way I felt when someone looked at me like I wasn't invisible. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Not because of guilt, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't sure who I was pretending to be.